You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates. Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting The Coffee Hour. You can find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu. Live Uncommon. We continue our series learning about recognized service organizations and church worker wellness. Today, we get to learn about Grace Point Institute for Relational Health. Our guest, the Reverend Dr. Mark Hannemann, is the co-founder and president of Grace Point Institute for Relational Health. Dr. Hannemann, welcome.
It is good to be with you, Andy. Thank you.
Looking forward to learning about the work of Grace Point today and how you care for individuals, families, and how that also supports church worker wellness. Let's start with the story. Why did Grace Point begin? Can you share that story with us?
So my son, Justin, a seminary student here in St. Louis at Concordia Seminary, back in the mid-2000s, I think he got started here in town at St. Louis University, coming out of Concordia University, Nebraska. He wanted to pursue a marriage and family therapy program, so he enrolled at St. Louis University and got started in that program and had intention to also go through the seminary program. So a year into that master's program at St. Louis University, he started in at the seminary and kind of worked both of those programs in those years. When he came out then and was ready for deferred vicarage, we had him at the church I served in Omaha in those days. And then coming out of that year of vicarage, things worked out for him to start Grace Point Institute. It was in his head, in his heart, and in his journal to take both that theological training and that great equipping at St. Louis University Medical School in marriage and family therapy and marry theology and that practice of caring for individuals, couples, and families, and take that into a ministry model that might serve the community. And so that's how it started. It was December 12 years ago that he met with his first client in a house provided by one of our board members. We got a board together, a 501c3, and more recently got our RSO designation from the Synod. And so that work continues. And that's how it got started.
Tell me about the services provided by Grace Point today. What are the services available?
So we have grown from just Justin doing therapy to 12 therapists with various skill sets and backgrounds and trainings, from LADAC folks who deal with addiction recovery to adolescent specialists. We've got pastors on our staff. We have, with the addition of another son of mine, Aaron, who went through Concordia Irvine's Townsend Center counseling program. He's directing one of our site offices at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Columbus, Nebraska, and he's doing Spanish language counseling for folks in that community. So that's been a real breakthrough moment for us to be able to expand to another language of providing this Christ-centered and cross-focused work with people. And so that's been a real blessing to see that development as well. So we, and those three offices in Nebraska, Omaha, Lincoln, and now Columbus more recently, we provide counseling services for folks in the community, get a lot of referrals from pastors and clients, former clients. But we also specialize in care for church workers and working with a number of district presidents across the country, but really trying to bloom where we're planted in the Nebraska district. So we are partnered with the district. Justin is a part-time assistant with the district president, Rich Snow, and he does work with our church workers and congregations in the Nebraska district, marriage and ministry retreats. That happens 2-3 times a year, where he gathers up pastors and wives for a 3-day experience. But then he does a lot of consultation, intervention, crisis management. We also have a counselor, 2 counselors, in fact, at Concordia University in Seward, helping with that student population, and a counselor that goes and comes each week from Lincoln Lutheran Junior Senior High School as well. So we are trying to do as much as we can with the limited resources and staff that we have, but we're very blessed to have all church worker people that are manning the station at these offices as licensed therapists, but also former DCEs or pastors' wives, pastors, teachers. And so we've got a wonderful collection of folks whom we believe God has had a hand in sending us to be doing this work in our communities, but also across the country, reaching and connecting sometimes with online therapy with church workers from from here and there, and sometimes opportunities to have them in to do marriage intensives in particular. So some of the work we do is helping those that are really finding themselves in a crisis in marriage, family, or in ministry. And then we do our best in a marriage and to really try to sort things out and help get them back on their feet.
What would you say is unique about the way that Grace Point approaches counseling or therapy compared to, there are a number of resources when it comes to counseling and therapy. What makes Grace Point unique in your approach to counseling and therapy?
We really see ourselves, and this is really even part of our documentation on our website or in our brochure. We see ourselves and seek to be an extension of the healing ministry of Jesus Christ. We know that He is the great physician. If there is to be healing of body, mind, spirit, soul, relationship through reconciliation, it is Christ, His death, His resurrection, and all that can mean for individuals and couples. That's at the core and at the center is its relational health. It was not an accident that we have this long, cumbersome name, Grace Point Institute for Relational Health, relationship with God, self, primary others, so important. Our first neighbor to love is those who live with us under that roof, right? Spouses and children, our family. But then all others then too, relationship with everyone else, but also important to us is our relationship with God's created order, with the creation as well. So relational health along all those lines is something that we pay attention to, think about, talk about, and is most important to us. It's always a focus on relationships.
You serve primarily in Nebraska in those 3 sites that you mentioned just a moment ago. What about beyond serving in Nebraska? Does Grace Point serve beyond that area?
So our relationships with a number of district presidents have taken us to their locations for one reason or another, for educational purposes, presentations, workshops, intervention in crisis management situations. For example, I had an opportunity when the fire broke out in Lahaina and decimated that community. In Maui, in Hawaii, I went within days to go to be of service there, providing support and help and counseling for the good folks at Emmanuel Lutheran Church and School in Maui, and then also to go and provide on-site care for survivors of that fire that were put in area resorts near Lahaina. So a chance to work on behalf of the district, and even the Synod, LCEF, had gift cards for us to be able to make available in a crisis situation for the survivors of that terrible fire and that terrible disaster there. Last spring, I had opportunity to go to South Africa and be of service to our LCMS missionaries, our African cohort of missionaries, to provide a multi-day retreat and content there for them. And so the work kind of takes us to a variety of places and all related one way or another to our core mission of focus on relational health that focuses most importantly on a relationship with Christ and what it means to be in Him and to represent Him and to be reconciled to God and each other in His name with what He offers us with the power of the resurrection that Paul talks about in Philippians 3.
So serving primarily in Nebraska and other places where Grace Point is invited to serve and be of service to those in need.
Yeah.
Tell me more about, you mentioned caring for church workers. What does that look like through Grace Point?
Primarily, the work that we do is with church workers who are in our region, I would say. That's first and foremost. So we have many church workers that we counsel with in our district, many church workers going and coming from those 3 offices who are referred to us, who find us, or who are recommended to us by the district president or others in district leadership. So there's that work. We sometimes are called into congregations to do crisis management. If there's an event that happens in a congregation that calls for people coming together and having conversations that sort of settle things down a bit and work through strong emotions, we've had those opportunities too. The work sometimes with ministry couples is a particular area of focus for us, making sure that their relationship is strong so that they can be secure and strong in the work that they do for the Lord as a pastor or DC or principal or a teacher in one of our schools. So primarily our church worker efforts are focused on folks in the Nebraska district and in close by states as well. Kansas, Iowa West, South Dakota. We have been doing assessments as well, where a church worker may find themselves just in a quandary in terms of how vocation is going, how things are going, and we do assessments and report back to district presidents what we might be finding vocationally, perhaps sometimes, or if folks are just really struggling with some mental health issues, we try to get a handle on that and chart a new course forward for them so that they can stay in the work that God has called them to do.
We're learning about Grace Point Institute for Relational Health with Dr. Mark Hannemann. We'll continue the conversation in just a moment right here on the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
At Concordia University, Wisconsin, we believe you were created for a reason, to use your God-given gifts to help others, to live a life of self-sacrifice in a me-first world, to live a life that's uncommon. Whether you're taking one of 50-plus online programs or learning with us in person on the shores of Lake Michigan, you'll be equipped to make an uncommon impact. Learn more at cuw.edu. Concordia University, Wisconsin. Live uncommon.
Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates. We are learning about Grace Point Institute for Relational Health today with the Reverend Dr. Mark Hannemann. He serves as co-founder and president of Grace Point Institute for Relational Health and serving primarily in Nebraska, but also going where invited beyond Nebraska as well, where those services may be needed, caring for mind, body, heart, and soul as an extension of the healing ministry of Jesus. Did I get all that right?
That sounds good. That sounds right.
We talked a little bit about caring for church workers and what church worker wellness looks like through Grace Point Institute for Relational Health. How does Grace Point support congregations? You mentioned a little bit about coming in when, a situation has happened that needs some support. How else does Grace Point interact with congregations or serve congregations?
Proactively, we have opportunities and entrees into congregations through varieties of events that may happen over the course of time where lay people are invited and we have a chance to sort of speak into lay leadership about the care of church workers and that church workers are people too. And if you pinch them, they say, ouch, and poke them, they might bleed, that we're real people and that we've got families and issues and maybe financial troubles or mental health issues, relational trouble in a family, and that we call for grace and support and encouragement, and that we're in this together in the ministry to serve Christ. And what can leaders do to help support all their church workers so that their work might indeed be a joy and that we're not at odds. So it takes us into settings sometimes where a conflict has emerged. I know that's a very rare thing in the church to ever see any conflict with anybody, but sometimes it happens. And so we try to talk through those issues and help in any way that we can to settle things down so that relationships can go well and the work can go well. But those flashpoints are sometimes places where we find ourselves, or if there's a crisis in a congregation that just creates a lot of trouble, that can be a place too where we are invited to be of help. Sometimes we're just working with lay people, sometimes just with the church workers in those situations, and in other times in more group meetings where everybody's together.
When we look at congregations today, how do we care for church workers? Do we need to look at improving that culture of congregation of how we care for church workers?
I think it's common these days that everyone would say, well, we're doing the best we can.
Mm-hmm.
We're busy. We have our own lives and families, and we come to church and try to do what we have to do, and then we go back to these busy lives. I think there can be more intentionality on the part of congregations, leadership, especially boards of elders, who have that particular charge to look after the flock spiritually and tend to those issues. And most often in most congregations, the elders are charged with the care of the workers too, especially the pastor or the pastor's family in that congregation. And to recognize that many problems can be headed off at the pass if congregational leadership regularly tends to what might be going on in the worker's family. How can we help you? Times of recognition, I suppose, once a year, that's fine, but that's not the most needed part of church worker care. It's just regularly checking in, seeing how things are going, but then being responsive if there is an issue that needs attending, to make that a high priority so that that's addressed. And so church workers feel like we're on the same team and we're working together and we're not on an island. Church workers can feel very isolated. You're everybody's friend, kind of, and nobody's friend at the same time, because you have to be careful about those relationships and not getting too close, because betrayal and getting burned can happen pretty easily in the ministry. And so it's a delicate kind of line that church workers have to walk. But I think there's so much that congregations can do, and many congregations are exemplary in their efforts to provide help and support and ongoing care for their church workers. And it's a real joy and blessing. And you can sort of sense that in a place as well. And other congregations or schools, our institutions, there's a palpable lack of that kind of consideration, that kind of care, so that there's this distance, suspicion, conflict that so easily emerges. And so I think so often folks are left alone and until some crisis emerges, and then, we're forced into having to deal with something, rather than staying in close contact with church workers. And sometimes I've seen it done very well, where somebody or a couple of people from a board of elders or a church council or whatever the leadership group is, has as their express responsibility to check in with the church workers, see how things are going on purpose, regularly. I think that's a good model. But then church workers have to be honest and say, and that's a hard thing for us as well, to say, we really have a problem, because while you live in that fishbowl, it's pretty easy to try to hide things that might be going wrong in life, in family, or with your kids or spouse. So it's hard to be real and to be honest sometimes.
You mentioned some exemplary ways that congregations care for their church worker. What are some examples of exemplary care of church workers that you've seen, ways that congregations have practiced that care?
Beyond the October perfunctory sort of pastor appreciation month, which really has, I think in our circles, more work toward church worker appreciation month, where maybe there are some things that a congregation might do. Well beyond that, it's just a regular contact. Maybe it's as simple as taking folks out just for a social gathering, let's say after a meeting once a month, just to let the hair down, not talking about church, talking about life. I've seen it work very well, where lay people will take pastor or other workers with them to do something fun. I have a son in Colorado who took his pastor and family skiing because they love to go skiing. And so that was an outing. I'm sure the pastor was pleasantly surprised with a chance to just go and have a fun day skiing in the mountains of Colorado. It's those kinds of things, I think, that break down walls, that draw people closer together, and that somebody at church knows what's going on with the worker's family, And so I think there are varieties of things, practical things that can be done. I think a lot of our workers really don't get an annual review, even a chance to reflect on the year. How are we doing? What could go better? But in that setting, maybe larger churches with HR people or pastors who can find the time to sort of look after staff. The last church I served, there were 70 people on the payroll. This pastor could not sit down with all of those people. I did my best with the ones that were directly reporting to me, right? So it's challenging. It's really challenging. And is that the best model for a pastor to be the one having those kinds of interviews? Obviously, you have to tend to the work, but are there other models where the folks who actually issued the call, the pastor didn't issue the call, the congregation issues these calls or contracts for the workers? And so how are they tending to not only the work, which is important, but us church workers as human beings, flesh and blood people who have our lives outside of church too. And so we always appreciate the consideration, the support, but it goes both ways. And I've seen churches that do an outstanding job of appreciating their volunteers as well. So I think it's a two-way street where it's not just about the workers getting looked after, but also all those people that are really involved in ministry as well. They need encouragement too.
With about 2 minutes left, maybe some insights for church workers that you think would be useful, maybe some things that you've seen that are pretty typical or common among us church workers when you're out in the field caring for church workers. Maybe a tip or some insight that you think it would be useful to us as church workers when it comes to wellness.
Everyone has problems. Everyone is dealing with something around the wellness wheel, if you will, those 6 typical elements of the wellness wheel where attention needs to be paid. Maybe I just have to be willing to ask for help when things aren't going very well. If I'm dealing with some physical symptoms, I don't know how many times I encourage my clients, the folks that I counsel with, have you been to your doctor? Have you had a physical? Don't ignore things, but also relationally. If things aren't going well there, get some help, talk to somebody, find someone to work with. And obviously at Grace Point, we're in the business of having those very meaningful, deep conversations on a daily basis with our folks and helping them to see that it's okay to be struggling. It's okay to have problems. It's okay to have challenges in your life. It's a part of life. I think about Romans 5 and how suffering too is part of life. We at Grace Point try to help people see that suffering too is a part of God developing in us perseverance and character and hope. And that hope, as Paul says, does not disappoint us, but it is something that the Holy Spirit is at work increasing in our hearts and our lives and our minds, this wonderful gift of hope from the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And so to build resilience, endurance, but a character too is developed, as the scriptures say, in that process. And so, and like my mom used to say, or dad, this too shall pass, that it might seem overwhelming at the moment, but let's work this through. Let's pull things apart and see how we might find some solutions to the challenges that our church workers are facing. And everybody has issues, everybody has challenges, and some of them are hard to cope with and very challenging. But with God's help, he says he will see us through.
How can we learn more about Grace Point Institute for Relational Health?
Relationalhealth.org is our website. A lot of information there about our ministry. And that's the place to start. And our phone number is there and contacts for our counselors and more information about the ministry is found at relationalhealth.org.
You've been listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.